Episode 245, Rain, Dirt and Soil. This is the Change Underground for the week ending 15th of February 2021. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. The variations in climatic conditions continue. We got 136 mils in 24 hours, which was very welcome. That's about 5 1/3 inches of rain in the old money. And the surprising thing was the lack of runoff and pooling on the surface of the fields. Now, I knew things were thirsty, but this was quite astonishing. That we had rainfall soaking straight into the soil rather than pooling and or running off, as it did our first winter here, tells me that we're getting more life into the soil. More spaces within the soil profile for the rain to find its way into. Always nice to have some positive feedback. Of course, I just have to keep my weather eye out in case it's simply bias confirmation and I'm missing something else that's actually happening. But I think we're okay. But then I would think that, wouldn't I, if I was bias confirming. Anyway, enough of these rabbit holes. Here's a snippet from What's Driving Erosion Worldwide on the Science Daily website, link in the show notes. Quote, erosion is more severe in poor countries than in rich ones, end quote. Why? I've seen huge machines tearing the guts out of soil, sending it in great plumes across the landscape. Hell, I've even seen it at the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture as we came out for lunch at a cover crop symposium. I'm not sure the irony was appreciated, but definitely the irony was there. In my naivety, I had attended in the hope of localised recommendations for cover cropping. Took me half a day to work out they were still trying to sell the idea of cover cropping as a thing. And of course, the ploughing at lunch was one of the best pieces of advertising for cover cropping, but I think they missed the chance. That erosion is greater in poorer countries than richer is not surprising on one level. If social history has taught us anything, and this might be the only thing that social history has ever taught us, it is this. The rich have a better life than the poor. Better housing, better food, better life expectancy, better medicine, and so on. Are the rich any happier than the poor? Who knows? But by measurable variables, the rich seem to have an easier time of life. The point, though, as we have learned through the last 12 months, is we are all in this together. The world will not be free of the effects of this current pandemic until all, rich and poor, are vaccinated. Any population left outside the vaccination process will be a breeding ground for genetic variation in the virus, which is capable of overcoming the vaccinations. Now, soil erosion, whilst more slow-moving than a virulent novel virus, will have the same effect. Once the soil is depleted, less food is produced. People move to cities and eventually create migration pressures, which impact richer countries. Now, the economic modelling shows that immigration is a net benefit to richer countries, which means, one, they're depleting the poorer countries, and two, there's a lot of nonsense available for popularists to stir up the masses. But if we toss into this mix a dumping of ag chemicals into the developing world without the correct training, and the process of soil erosion accelerates. I've heard anecdotal stories, so not data, but still concerning, of developing country farmers not being able to read the labels on chemical drums because they're in English and they speak French or Swahili or one of the other Bantu languages, and assume the contents are fertiliser, only to have sprayed insecticides across maize fields, which is a quick way to kill off both soil health and farmers' health too, for that matter. There are ways to fix this, but I'm pretty sure they need to be farmer-led. If someone in a suit or a four-wheel drive with a university badge on it turns up, there's a growing hesitancy to accept what they're selling. Now, this is true across the developed as well as developing nations, and not at all surprising, given the universities and departments of primary industry have for the last 70 years been de facto sales force for the agrochemical industry. Done for the most part with good intentions, but clearly now a failed paradigm. The answer, I suggest, is farmer-led solutions. Sloping agricultural land technology that's in wide use in the Philippines is a good example, and there's a link to a review of SALT, as it's called, in the show notes. While I'm not sure where this system was developed, it has been passed on from farmer to farmer in parts of the Philippines. And no one knows local growing conditions like a fellow farmer. Combine that with the practical demonstration of the benefits of organic, regenerative, biodynamic permaculture systems on the soil, the health of their farmers and their families, and this is the big one, a profitability change can occur. This profitability thing is important. It does depend upon measuring the right variable. I've heard several US corn growers state that too much emphasis is put on production numbers, X number of bushels per acre. Whatever a bushel is, as far as I can recall, it's a thing not to hide one's light under, but I digress. The individuals who bring this measurement up are the ones who are producing less per acre, but with minimal input costs. So if you're not flooding the soil with ammonia and superphosphate, followed by drenching the paddocks in Roundup, because the only corn seed you can grow is GMO, you can reach impressive, in inverted commas, production numbers. I'm assuming this is a variation on the age-old mine is bigger than yours male bragging rights system of measuring things. And in systems where the government pays you to cover the cost of production, maybe it makes sense on some levels. Yet the low input farmer still receives a subsidy and a much greater financial return each year. They can afford to be smaller, and I think that's a good thing. Now, on a similar note, I read years ago, and I can't find the link, probably not even exists anymore, unless I go to archive.org, about these dairy farmers who returned to seasonal milking. That is, they stopped milking during winter. All the cows dropped at the same time and were dried off at the same time. That wasn't the biggest change they'd made, but it was the one the neighbours saw to begin with. What they were also doing was, and this was way back in the 1990s, so before it was called regenerative grazing, they were moving their milking herd up to 3 times a day to keep the feed fresh, the beasts on clean feed, and all the other benefits that regen brings. I should also point out that they'd transferred over to permanent pastures, and so erosion was a thing of the past. They'd slashed their input costs quite considerably and were able to make more money milking seasonally than by keeping cows locked in sheds and bringing the feed to them and keeping them going 24 for 365 days a year. So as we began this episode with an income disparity leading to outcomes based on that disparity, I think it would be useful to see the soil erosion issue, the pandemic, and global warming as all problems within a similar domain. They require us to work on planetary solutions, leaving no one behind. I would come to this position through the thought that it was the right thing to do. Others may have to be persuaded that leaving part of the world out of the changes required will impact everyone, including them. I'm hoping we can get our shite together. The rollout of the vaccine to the developing world will be a clue as to how well we can overcome the other more slowly moving yet perhaps more existential threats facing us as a species and as part of the ecosystem of the world. You might not have great swathes of land to demonstrate a better way of doing things. I certainly don't. But we can all grow our gardens, and while we and others are growing food in our no-dig gardens, we will be decarbonising the air and recarbonising the soil. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.